Hey there, fellow ChessGoons. My name is Anthony Arena. I am a 2000 rated chess expert from Long Island, New York. And today we're going to go over a three-step process for solving the five most difficult chess puzzles in the entire world that are absolutely meant to trick you. These puzzles are rated at an average of 2% and over 3000 ELO. So these are very difficult, but we're going to use a very simple method and solve all five of these puzzles. Let's start off with puzzle number one. That's rated at 3000 ELO with a 2.8% pass rate. And the first step of our process is identifying our opponent's threats. So we want to say, is there anything that needs immediate attention or something that we have to develop counterplay for? And I see two attacks, G takes H6, opening up the king side, and then possibly even this B push, but nothing that I'm particularly worried about just yet. I think we can move on to step two, which is, are there weaknesses in our opponent's position? And the answer is yes. The king is wide open. Our opponent's pieces aren't necessarily mobilized to protect properly. And queen g4 will instigate a really nice attack. And notice in this way, if the king moves over to the f file at any point, the rook gets developed and we will be in a really good position. We will most likely mate our opponent. Okay, king moves over to h1. Now, I would instantly think that rook f8 is the best move here because it develops the rook and puts us in a nice position, but we should probably use our third step in this process, which is identify our opponent's counterplay. Now, one piece of counterplay that I see right away is that if the rook came down to b3, all of a sudden the queen can now block, and then the rook can block, and in that way, we wouldn't be able to keep checking the king, and he'd be able to defend himself quite nicely up an exchange and up a pawn, and eventually he would promote. So let's try to prevent this idea of rook b3. And I believe the best way to do that will be check on h4. The queen cannot go into h3 because we would just take. There's nothing defending the queen just yet. So the king has to move over, and it looks like g2 is the choice here. And now rook to f8, because if the rook comes down to b3, we have a checkmate after rook f2, king g1, queen h2, mate, game over. Right. So we successfully stopped the counterplay of rook b3. But this game isn't far from over, and our opponent goes to try to instigate a trade, rook f1. Now, rook f1 to me isn't particularly scary. My natural instinct is to take and then try to develop the knight, but notice the queen doesn't necessarily have to take back. It can still defend these two crucial squares at e3 and d2, and the king can just take back, and all of a sudden our opponent is just winning. So first, queen g4. You do have to just move over here instead to king h2. And now rook takes, queen takes back, and then developing the knight to d2. Now we're forking the queen, and we're also threatening f3 check, which would most likely either win us the queen or the game, right? So there's really no way to defend this. All right, let's move on to puzzle number two. We have a 3200 rated puzzle at 2.51% pass rate. So this one's quite difficult. We first ask ourselves, what is the threat? Well, rook h4 pins the knight to the king, but notice in this way, if the rook does take the knight, king just takes back. We're not too worried about it. I have no problem with going to step two, which is instigating the attack. And I think the best place to go is king b3. And we're obviously expecting that the king comes to c1, but I believe we will be okay, right? Because if king to c1, we'll simply just be able to move the rook out of the way. However, guys, be careful. Do not play king to c3, because if you do, it falls to this nasty drawing tactic, rook c4, brilliant move. King is forced to take back, and then the rook is lost, and you cannot checkmate your opponent with a king and a knight. It's not possible. So that's going to be a draw if you make the mistake of playing king c3. Instead, we're going to go for rook d3. And the idea here is simple. This is an extremely important chess concept called zugzwang. And what this means is we're forcing our opponent to make a move. So notice that the king has no squares that it can move to, right? The only move would be b1, but that would fall to ladder mate. So we're forcing our opponent's rook to move. And wherever the rook moves, it's a bad position for our opponent. In this case, our opponent will go rook h2, and he's looking to try to defend this file, but we're okay. It's no big deal. We still have knight to a2, which is checking the king. There are no squares. If the king moves over to b1, it's ladder mates. The rook has to take. King takes back. And after maybe king c2, just back the rook out of the way. Get out of there. We'll get the mate eventually. We're not in a rush. Chess puzzle number 3, 3,300 rated, 2.06% pass rate. This one is extremely difficult. And I believe the reason why so many people fail this puzzle is because they look right for d4, right? So I'm not particularly worried about any threats here. This queen isn't doing very much. B7 doesn't work. Maybe C6, but that's nothing too crazy. But when you look at the threats, the first thing you're eyeing down is obviously D4, which is a check. But I see after the E3 and then maybe even bishop E2 that the position ends up being quite nice for white. And he is up in exchange here. So we need to find a different weakness. D4 will not do the trick. And I think the obvious one here, and something that people might miss because it's always in the bottom corner of the board, is the queen on A8. And if you identify this weakness, the next move is quite easy. We need to defend A7, and queen B6 does the trick. This is a great move because it stops the queen from taking, and it stops the queen from going to C6. His escape squares are now completely cut off. There is no way out. Okay, our opponent plays rook over to c1, and it's a double attack on the bishop. But here we have another brilliant move, and it's simply just knight b8. This is a great move because it stops the queen and bishop from attacking. If the rook takes, rook just takes back, and it's just no big deal, right? There's just no way out, right? So, okay, we know there's no way out. So let's just try e3, looking to develop the bishop. But here in this situation, simply just bishop e7 and the queen is lost. The engine is saying the best move here would simply just to be rook takes. And yes, this does save the queen, but barely. The queen is still trapped. The rook was the most active piece. This rook's not getting involved until one of these pawns move, and then the bishop moves. And with this kind of tempo, we're going to be completely winning this game. It shouldn't be a problem. Also, number 4, another 2.06 pass rate, but this one is a little bit higher rated, 3,400. So the rook moved over to G1, and I want you to notice that there actually is a threat here that we have to be very wary of. So step 1, we should identify that threat. Bishop F6, discover attack on the queen, and we're losing. If you can identify that there is a serious threat here, the next move is actually kind of obvious. Now, we do have to weigh the pros and cons of making this move. I'm thinking king g8, but the rook takes back the bishop. But hear me out. If king moves over g8, which is a great move, by the way, yes, rook takes. Notice the pawn can't take because there is a pin on the pawn with this queen. And now all of a sudden, this position looks very dangerous for black, but we have a very dangerous brilliant here. Rook e1, brilliant. And in this way, if the queen was to take, we have mate in 1 on the spot. And this is what we call piece overload. The queen is the only piece that can take this rook, but it's also the only piece that's defending h2, which is mate on the spot. So you have to then move the king over g2. You can't take back with the queen. And that opens up queen h2, which rips open the position and is, in fact, winning for black. Finally, guys, the world's hardest puzzle, rated at 3,500 with a 1.76% pass rate. And this one's really difficult. So hear me out. What is the threat? It's not necessarily a threat, but queen c2 tells me that he's worried about rook h3 mate, and he's going to push the pawn down to f4 with the queen defending this pawn, and he's going to try to defend himself. So if you can actually figure that out, the next move makes a lot of sense. Even though it is absolutely ridiculous, we can play bishop h6. Brilliant, by the way. And the reason why this is brilliant is simple. You actually can't take this bishop. This is the most obvious part, but if queen e7, notice there's no way to save the rook and the mate. If rook moves over, we have check. The rook must block. And then rook g3. And in this way, it is simply just force mate. There's no other pieces. There's no other pieces that will defend that rook. Okay. So we know that you can't take the pawn. So what can you do here? Well, if you push f4, defending this position, rook f4. And if the rook takes, that is simply just mate. The rook has to come back. The bishop has to come back. It doesn't matter. We'll just take both pieces, and it is simply just back rank. So, okay, we know that you can't push the pawn. There's also a threat of rook g3, and the best way to defend that is bishop e8, rook g3, and then bishop g6. We won't give our opponent the opportunity to play bishop g6. There are too many threats on the board, and we're going to take advantage of them. Queen e7 attacks the rook. Rook's going to have to move over. And here we have the absolutely amazing move, and really the whole reason why we played bishop to h6. Bishop takes. And in this way, if the rook takes, queen takes back, rook must defend, queen e6, and we've ripped this entire position open. And queen f6 followed by rook g3 is coming. Overall, guys, let me know in the comment section if you got any of these puzzles right. I'll be honest, I only got 2 out of 5 on first go, so it was quite difficult. So definitely let me know how you guys did on this. Other than that, if you enjoy the content, please go ahead and leave a like and subscribe. There's more coming. In fact, if you like this video, you would definitely like this video over here on the 7 most important checkmates that you absolutely need to know in order to hit the expert level. Overall, guys, thank you so much. Stay classy. Until next time.